I still remember the day we buried my father. The sky was dark and the air was heavy, like it knew what was coming. But the real nightmare didn't start until after he was in the ground. My father was a greedy man. He made his fortune late in life, but he never shared it with us, his own family. My mother, she was the one who stood by him when he was nothing. She worked long hours, fed us, and supported him while he was trying to make something of himself. But as soon as he struck gold, he changed. He became cold, stingy. Everything was about the money, and none of it ever reached us. He always told us, "You must learn to fend for yourselves." That was his excuse every time my mother or one of us needed help. We thought things would change when he got sick. But when he died, the truth came out. There was no will for us. Nothing for my mother. Nothing for his children. He left everything to his own family. The same people who disrespected him, the ones who abandoned him when he had nothing. It was like he'd forgotten who stood by him when he was at his lowest. My mother, she never cried. Not once. But there was something in her eyes after the reading of the will. Something dark. Something I can't explain. That's when things started happening. It began a few nights after the funeral. My younger brother was the first to notice it. He said he heard footsteps in the hallway at night, heavy, like boots on the wooden floor. We thought it was the grief messing with his head, but then I started hearing it too. At first, I thought it was just the house settling, but the footsteps always stopped right outside my mother's room. She never said anything about it, but I knew she heard it too. Then, one night, I woke up to the sound of something scraping against the walls. I thought maybe it was an animal, but when I went to check, the noise stopped. I walked down the hallway, and as I passed my mother's room, I saw it. Him. My father, standing there in the shadows. His face was twisted in anger, but it wasn't just anger. It was pain, regret. His eyes followed me as I stood frozen in place. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. Then, without a word, he turned and walked into my mother's room. I stood there for what felt like hours, heart pounding. Eventually, I worked up the courage to open her door, but when I did, she was just sitting there staring out the window. "He forgot," she whispered, her voice cold. He forgot who was there for him. After that, it got worse. Every night, we'd hear the footsteps, the scraping, the whispers. But now, they weren't just in the hallway. They were in the walls, in the ceiling, all around us. It was like the house itself was angry. One night, I found my mother standing at the foot of her bed, staring at a photo of my father. She didn't say a word, but I knew she was thinking about what he'd done, how he'd left us with nothing. And then, as if in response to her thoughts, the room got cold, ice cold. Suddenly, the lights flickered and the whispers grew louder. I could hear them now. His voice, angry, accusing, like he was trying to justify what he did, trying to make us believe it was all for a reason. But we knew better. "He can't rest," my mother said, her voice steady, but there was no warmth in it. "He knows what he did. He knows he left us with nothing." The haunting didn't stop. It got worse. Things would move around the house. Objects would disappear, only to reappear in strange places. My father's presence became more intense, and every time I saw him, his face looked more twisted, more desperate, like he was begging for forgiveness. But he couldn't speak. One night, my mother finally spoke to him. She stood in the middle of the hallway, looking straight at the spot where his figure always appeared. "You left us with nothing," she said, her voice cold and sharp. You gave everything to those who didn't care about you. You were greedy, and now you suffer. The air seemed to grow thicker, the whispers louder, angrier. My father's figure flickered, and for the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. He'll never find peace, my mother whispered to me that night. Not until he makes it right. After that, the noises became unbearable. The house felt like it was suffocating us, like the very walls were closing in. My father's shadow appeared more frequently, and every time he seemed more desperate, more lost. In the end, my mother did the only thing she could. She gathered us all together one night and spoke aloud to the empty room. You made your choice, she said. Now, you live with it. The house went silent after that. The footsteps, the whispers, they stopped. But the feeling of his regret, his anger, his fear, it never left. I don't know if he'll ever find peace, but I know one thing. Greed destroys everything. Even in death, it doesn't let go.